The champagne tasted like metal in my mouth as Preston's voice carried across the mahogany conference table at our family investment meeting, his words sharp and deliberate like a knife finding soft tissue. "Let's be honest about what we're discussing here," he said, not bothering to look at me while addressing the 7 family members gathered in his downtown Denver office. "Natalie counts beans for a living. She pushes numbers around spreadsheets. I build empires, actual buildings people can see and touch. So when it comes to major financial decisions affecting this family's legacy, I think we all know whose judgment carries more weight." He gestured dismissively in my direction without making eye contact. "No offense, but there's a difference between real money and the kind of money accountants understand. One creates wealth, the other just tracks it." The silence that followed felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. My husband Owen sat beside me, his jaw clenched, staring at his untouched coffee. Bianca, Preston's wife, examined her manicure with practiced disinterest. My father-in-law, Gerald, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Preston smiled that cold smile he used when he believed he'd won an argument, leaned back in his leather chair, and continued discussing the proposed $2.3 million investment as if I weren't even in the room. Let me back up so you understand how I ended up sitting in that conference room, being dismissed by a man who would soon learn exactly what accountants understand about money. I'm Natalie Chen, actually Natalie Foster now, 32 years old, and I'm not just an accountant. I'm a CPA specializing in forensic accounting, which means I investigate financial fraud for a living. I work for a firm that helps businesses uncover embezzlement, trace hidden assets, and build cases for prosecution. For 8 hours a day, I follow money trails that people think they've buried deep enough to stay hidden. I'd met Owen in 2018 through mutual friends at a hiking group. He was kind, steady, thoughtful, working as an architect with moderate success. His older brother Preston, however, was the family golden child. Wealthy real estate developer, flashy lifestyle, always the center of attention at family gatherings. Preston had built a portfolio of commercial properties, starting with seed money from their father Gerald, and he never let anyone forget his success. When Owen and I married in 2020, Preston gave a toast at our wedding that somehow became more about his own achievements than our happiness. "To my little brother," he'd said, "who's finally found someone as sensible and practical as himself. May you build a comfortable life together." The passive aggression in that toast should have been my first warning, but I was too focused on building a marriage to notice the foundation was already cracked. Owen's family had money. Not billionaire money, but comfortable multi-generational wealth from Gerald's successful medical supply business before retirement. There was a family trust worth approximately $4.7 million, managed collectively by Gerald, Preston, and Owen, with me added as a beneficiary after the wedding. Preston positioned himself as the financial expert who would grow the family assets through strategic real estate investments. Over the next 4 years, Preston regularly proposed investment opportunities at quarterly family meetings, always presenting glossy proposals with projected returns that sounded impressive to people who didn't understand the commercial real estate market as deeply as I did. I questioned several deals, pointing out inflated valuations, questionable market assumptions, and risk factors Preston hadn't addressed. Each time he'd respond with some version of the same dismissal. That's the difference between people who analyze deals and people who make them happen. Owen would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent request to keep the peace. Gerald would nod along with Preston's explanations, and the investments would proceed despite my objections. By early 2024, I'd learned to stay mostly quiet during these meetings, offering my professional opinion only when directly asked and letting Preston's condescension wash over me without visible reaction. But something about the February 15th meeting felt different. Preston was proposing we invest $2.3 million from the family trust into a mixed-use development project in Boulder, promising 18% annual returns within 3 years. The numbers looked wrong to me, not just optimistic but mathematically suspicious in ways that triggered the same instincts I used at work when investigating fraud. Property valuations seemed inflated by 30 to 40% compared to comparable recent sales. Construction cost estimates were oddly vague. The projected rental income assumed occupancy rates that Boulder's current market couldn't support. When I asked to see detailed financial projections and independent appraisals, Preston gave his usual dismissive response about real money versus bean counting. But this time, after the meeting ended and everyone dispersed, I didn't let it go. I went home and started doing what I do professionally. I investigated. I pulled public records for Preston's previous development projects. I reviewed property transactions, mortgage filings, and business registrations. I requested public documents from the county assessor's office showing property tax valuations for the buildings Preston claimed were performing so well. What I found over the next 3 days made my hands go cold, and my professional instincts scream warnings I couldn't ignore. Preston's previous investments using family trust money weren't performing anywhere near the returns he'd reported in our quarterly statements. A commercial building he'd purchased in 2021 for $3.8 million, which he claimed was now worth $5.2 million and generating strong rental income, was actually sitting 40% vacant, with a current market valuation of $3.1 million, a loss, not a gain. An office complex he'd bought in 2022 for $2.4 million showed $680,000 in delinquent property taxes and had been foreclosed on by the county in December 2023. Preston had never mentioned the foreclosure in any family meeting. The numbers weren't just disappointing or unlucky. They were evidence of systematic misrepresentation, possibly fraud. But the worst discovery came when I cross-referenced the family trust's investment history with Preston's personal property holdings. 3 properties the trust had invested in through Preston's development company were now listed in public records as owned personally by Preston, not by any entity connected to the family trust. Somehow, $6.2 million in family money had turned into Preston's personal real estate portfolio, while he continued presenting rosy quarterly reports showing strong performance and requesting more capital. I sat at my home office desk at 11:47 p.m. on February 18th, staring at the documents I'd compiled, feeling the same cold clarity I felt when building fraud cases for clients. This wasn't incompetence or bad luck. This was theft, executed over 4 years by someone who believed his family would never question him, because questioning Preston meant disrupting family harmony. Owen found me there after midnight, still going through records. "Nat, come to bed. You're obsessing over Preston again." I turned my laptop screen toward him. "Owen, he stole from us, from your father, from the family trust. Look at these property records. Look at the foreclosure notices. He's been lying about performance while transferring family assets into his own name." Owen looked at the screen, his expression shifting from tired to confused to something that looked like fear. "That can't be right. Preston wouldn't. He's family. There must be an explanation." I pointed to the ownership records. "The explanation is fraud. These 3 properties, the trust invested $6.2 million total. They're now owned personally by Preston, not held by the trust, not owned by his development company on behalf of the trust, owned by Preston individually." Owen sat down heavily. "What are you saying we should do?" I thought about it carefully. "I'm saying I need to do a complete forensic audit before the next family meeting, and depending on what I find, we might need to involve attorneys and possibly law enforcement." Over the next 2 weeks, I did something I'd never done before. I used my professional skills to investigate my own family. I worked late nights and weekends, pulling every public record I could access, building spreadsheets that tracked every dollar the family trust had invested through Preston since 2020. I called in a favor from Felix Torres, a colleague at my firm who specialized in real estate fraud, and had him review my findings to make sure I wasn't missing something or letting personal feelings cloud my analysis. Felix's review came back on March 3rd with a brief email. "Natalie, this is one of the clearest cases of self-dealing and embezzlement I've seen outside of criminal prosecutions. Total documented losses to the trust, $8.9 million. Assets misappropriated to personal ownership, $6.2 million. False statements to beneficiaries, dozens across 4 years. You need legal counsel immediately." I printed Felix's analysis and my own documentation. 147 pages of evidence showing exactly how Preston had systematically looted the family trust while presenting fabricated performance reports. Then I did something that felt like betraying family loyalty, but was actually protecting it. I called Austin Blake, an attorney who specialized in trust litigation and fiduciary misconduct. Austin reviewed everything over a 3-hour meeting and said quietly, Preston committed multiple felonies: breach of fiduciary duty, theft, fraud, possibly money laundering. The evidence is overwhelming. Austin explained my options with the careful precision of someone who'd handled similar cases before. You can file a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds and remove Preston as trustee. You can also file criminal complaints for theft and fraud. Given the amounts involved, nearly $9 million in documented losses, this is serious felony territory. He paused. But family cases are complicated. Are you prepared for what this will do to your relationships, your marriage, your husband's relationship with his brother and father? I thought about Owen, who'd asked me 3 times over the past 2 weeks if I was really sure about what I'd found, who kept suggesting there might be innocent explanations. I thought about Gerald, who'd built the family wealth and trusted his eldest son to protect it. I thought about Preston's dismissive voice. There's a difference between real money and the kind of money accountants understand. I met Austin's eyes. I'm a forensic accountant. Finding hidden money and proving fraud is literally what I do professionally. The evidence isn't ambiguous. Preston stole $8.9 million from his own family while lecturing me about not understanding real money. So yes, I'm prepared. Austin nodded once. Then we'll need to move carefully and strategically. Preston will fight this aggressively. He'll claim misunderstandings, he'll attack your credibility, he'll try to isolate you from Owen and Gerald. We need ironclad documentation, and we need to control the narrative. Austin recommended hiring a private investigator to document Preston's lifestyle and asset holdings before we filed anything publicly. Within a week, we had surveillance photos and financial records showing Preston living far beyond what his legitimate income could support. A $3.2 million house in Cherry Creek, a $180,000 Mercedes, private school tuition for his 2 children totaling $85,000 annually, luxury vacations to Aspen, Hawaii, and Europe, country club memberships, all funded by what should have been family trust assets. But the most damning discovery came from reviewing Preston's personal tax returns, which I obtained through a subpoena Austin arranged, citing the trust's right to examine fiduciary financial dealings. Preston had reported $420,000 in personal income for 2023, mostly from his development company's management fees and consulting revenue. But the lifestyle documented by our investigator required at least $650,000 annually to sustain. The missing $230,000 was coming from somewhere, and that somewhere appeared to be the family trust he was supposed to be managing for everyone's benefit, not his own. I created a comprehensive timeline showing the theft pattern. Every time Preston made an investment using trust money, he'd structure the deal so ownership eventually transferred to entities he personally controlled. He'd report strong performance to the family while the properties actually lost value or sat vacant. Then he'd propose new investments to cover the losses from previous ones, creating a classic Ponzi scheme structure using family money. On March 20th, Austin filed a lawsuit in Denver District Court naming Preston as defendant and seeking $8.9 million in restitution plus damages. We also filed formal complaints with the Colorado Attorney General's office and the Denver District Attorney's Fraud Division. Preston was served with papers at his office on March 21st at 9:15 a.m. He called me at 9:47 a.m., his voice shaking with rage. "What the hell is this, Natalie? You're suing me, your own brother-in-law? After everything I've done for this family?" I kept my voice calm and professional. "Preston, you stole $8.9 million from the family trust. I have documentation of every transaction, every misrepresentation, every property you transferred into your personal ownership. This isn't about family. This is about fraud." He went silent for exactly 5 seconds, then switched tactics. "You don't understand how real estate development works. There are complex structuring reasons for how those deals were set up. You're making yourself look foolish, and you're going to embarrass Owen and Dad with this vindictive nonsense. I'd prepared for this response. Then you'll have no problem explaining the complex structuring to the judge, the forensic accountant I've hired, and the criminal investigators reviewing the fraud complaints. All the documentation is public record now. Anyone can see exactly what you did. He hung up on me, but the calls kept coming. From Bianca, from Gerald, from Owen's aunt, demanding to know why I was tearing the family apart over a business disagreement. Owen was torn between me and his family in ways that made our marriage feel like it was cracking under pressure I couldn't control. Nat, couldn't we have handled this privately? Did you have to file a lawsuit and involve prosecutors? We were sitting in our living room. The lawsuit documents spread across the coffee table between us, like evidence at a crime scene. I looked at my husband, this man I loved who was asking me to stay quiet about theft because the thief was his brother. Owen, Preston stole nearly $9 million from your family. From you, from your father, from the trust that was supposed to secure everyone's future. He lied about it for 4 years while taking more money for investments that only enriched him. What part of that should I have handled privately? Owen rubbed his face with both hands. I know the numbers look bad, but maybe there's an explanation we're not seeing. Maybe the properties are worth more than public records show, or maybe he was planning to transfer ownership back once they stabilized. I pulled out the timeline I'd created. Look at this pattern. Every time, the same structure. Trust invests, Preston takes ownership, property underperforms or fails, Preston requests more money for the next deal. This isn't bad luck or complex structuring. This is systematic theft disguised as family investment management. Owen stared at the timeline for a long moment. He's still my brother. Can't you see how hard this is for me? I understood Owen's conflict, but I also understood something he didn't. Silence protects the powerful and destroys the victims. For 4 years, I'd stayed mostly quiet during family meetings, letting Preston dismiss my professional expertise, allowing his condescension to go unchallenged, because confronting him meant causing problems. That silence had cost the family $8.9 million. It wasn't happening again. Austin prepared for Preston's response, which came faster than expected. Preston hired Montgomery Pierce, an expensive litigation attorney known for aggressive tactics, who immediately filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the lawsuit was frivolous and motivated by family grudges rather than legitimate claims. The motion included an affidavit from Preston stating he'd managed family investments in good faith and that any losses were normal market fluctuations, not fraud. Montgomery also sent a letter threatening to countersue me for defamation and abuse of process if I didn't withdraw the lawsuit within 48 hours. Austin's response was methodical and devastating. He filed a 67-page opposition brief, including Felix's forensic analysis showing Preston had systematically misappropriated assets, property records proving ownership transfers, tax return comparisons showing Preston's lifestyle exceeded legitimate income, and copies of quarterly reports Preston had sent the family containing false performance claims. The brief ended with a simple statement. Defendant can claim good faith all he wants. The documents prove fraud, and documents don't lie. The judge denied Preston's dismissal motion on April 15th and ordered both parties to mediation scheduled for May 3rd. The weeks leading up to mediation were brutal on multiple levels. Gerald called me asking why I was destroying Preston over a business disagreement, apparently believing Preston's version that this was about differences in investment strategy rather than theft. Owen's aunt sent me a long email about family loyalty and how real families handle problems internally, not through courts. Bianca posted on social media about the importance of forgiveness and understanding in family relationships, a thinly veiled message directed at me. Through it all, I focused on the evidence and let the numbers speak for themselves. Felix completed a supplemental analysis showing that if Preston had simply invested the family trust money in basic index funds instead of his development deals, the trust would be worth $6.4 million more than it currently was. In other words, Preston's expert management had cost the family $6.4 million in opportunity cost on top of the $8.9 million he'd directly stolen. Meanwhile, our investigator discovered something new. Preston had recently opened a bank account in the Cayman Islands and transferred $1.8 million there in February, right before I started investigating. This suggested he either knew scrutiny was coming or was preparing to hide assets. Austin immediately filed an emergency motion to freeze Preston's assets and prevent him from moving money offshore. The judge granted it partially, freezing domestic accounts but lacking jurisdiction over the Cayman account without additional legal steps. Preston was running out of moves, and he knew it. Mediation day arrived with the kind of spring rain that makes Denver feel gray and cold, despite the calendar saying early May. We met at a neutral office building downtown, Austin and me on one side of a conference table, Preston and Montgomery on the other, with a professional mediator named Harold Watson facilitating. Preston looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his usual confident bearing replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Montgomery opened by offering a settlement. Preston would repay $2 million over 10 years and resign as trustee, and I would drop all claims including criminal complaints. Austin rejected it before I could even process the insult. My client wants full restitution of $8.9 million plus damages for breach of fiduciary duty plus costs and attorney fees. Total $11.6 million. And she will not interfere with criminal investigations. This isn't a negotiation about whether crimes were committed. The evidence proves they were. Harold shuttled between rooms as we retreated to separate spaces. During one break, Austin told me Montgomery had called me vindictive and suggested I was using accounting tricks to manufacture a case out of normal business losses. I felt the familiar cold clarity settle over me. Tell Montgomery I didn't manufacture anything. I just followed the money, which is what forensic accountants do. And if Preston thinks $8.9 million in theft is normal business losses, he can explain that to a jury. After 3 hours of mediation getting nowhere, Harold brought us back together for one final session. Preston tried to speak directly to me, his voice taking on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. Natalie, please. We're family. Can't we work this out without destroying each other? I made some mistakes in judgment, sure, but I never meant to hurt anyone. I was trying to build wealth for all of us. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the confident, dismissive brother-in-law who'd lectured me about real money, but a man who'd gambled with other people's assets and lost, then lied to cover his tracks. Preston, I said quietly, you didn't make mistakes in judgment. You stole property, forged ownership transfers, lied about performance, and transferred family assets into your personal name. That's not mistakes. That's fraud. And when I questioned your deals, you dismissed me as someone who only understood bean counting, not real money. Well, I understand money very well. I understand exactly where $8.9 million went, into your house, your cars, your lifestyle, and your offshore account. His face went red. You're destroying this family over money. Do you understand that? Gerald is devastated. Owen is torn apart. Bianca and the kids are suffering, all because you can't let this go. I stood up. I'm not destroying this family. You did that when you decided your brother, your father, and your family trust were resources to steal from. I'm just holding you accountable. I walked out and mediation ended without settlement. The case proceeded toward trial, scheduled for July 8th. But something unexpected happened in mid-May that changed everything. Owen finally saw the evidence clearly. I'd avoided pushing him too hard, knowing he needed time to process that his brother was a thief, and his family had chosen Preston's version of events over mine. But one evening, Owen came home from meeting Gerald for dinner and his face was pale. Dad showed me Preston's quarterly reports from the past 4 years, Owen said, sitting heavily on our couch. He wanted to prove that Preston's investments had performed well, and you were wrong. But Nat, I looked at the numbers. I know I'm not a financial expert, but even I could see the properties Preston claimed were worth millions are actually in foreclosure or sitting vacant. Dad doesn't understand that because he trusts Preston completely. But I see it now. He looked at me with something that might have been shame. You were right all along. Preston stole from us, and I asked you to stay quiet about it to keep the peace. I'm so sorry. I took his hand. You're not the one who should apologize. Preston is, and your father deserves to know the truth, even if it's painful. Owen nodded slowly. I want to testify at the trial. I want to support you publicly, and I want to talk to Dad and help him understand what really happened. Owen's decision to side with me publicly changed the family dynamics overnight. Gerald initially refused to believe his eldest son was a thief, but Owen spent hours going through the evidence with his father, showing him property records and foreclosure notices and ownership transfers Preston had never mentioned. Slowly, painfully, Gerald began to understand he'd been deceived. On June 2nd, Gerald did something that shocked everyone. He hired his own attorney to review the family trust's investment history independently. That attorney, a trust specialist named Victoria Cross, spent 3 weeks analyzing everything and delivered a report that confirmed every finding I'd made. Gerald called me on June 23rd, his voice thick with emotion. Natalie, I owe you an apology. You were protecting this family's assets while I was defending the person who stole them. Preston betrayed my trust, but you upheld it. I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner. I felt tears I'd been holding back for months finally release. Thank you, Gerald. I know how hard this is. He cleared his throat. Victoria says you have a strong case. Preston took money that wasn't his and lied about what he did with it. That's theft, regardless of family relationships. I want you to know I support your lawsuit, and I'll testify if needed. With Gerald's support now behind me and Owen standing beside me, the pressure shifted completely to Preston, who was facing his own family finally united in demanding accountability. The trial never happened. On July 2nd, 6 days before jury selection, Montgomery called Austin with a new settlement offer. Preston would plead guilty to felony theft and breach of fiduciary duty, pay full restitution of $8.9 million plus $1.2 million in damages and legal costs. Total, $10.1 million. Resign permanently from any role in the family trust and accept a suspended jail sentence with 5 years probation. In exchange, we'd agree not to pursue additional civil damages beyond the $10.1 million. Austin presented the offer to me in his office. This is complete capitulation. He's admitting everything, paying everything, and accepting criminal conviction. The only thing he's avoiding is actual jail time, which was always unlikely for a first offender willing to make restitution. I thought about it carefully. The money mattered. It would restore what Preston had stolen. But what mattered more was public acknowledgement that I'd been right, that the bean counter had understood money better than the man who'd built his identity around financial success. I accept, I said, but I want one more thing. I want Preston to send a written apology to the entire family, admitting specifically what he did and acknowledging he lied about investment performance while stealing assets. I want it on the record. Austin conveyed this to Montgomery. There was resistance, but ultimately Preston had no leverage left. On July 5th, Preston sent an email to every family member admitting he'd mismanaged trust investments, inappropriately transferred assets to personal ownership, and provided false performance reports to cover these actions. The settlement was finalized on July 12th in a brief court hearing where Preston formally pleaded guilty to felony theft and breach of fiduciary duty. He stood before Judge Marion Fletcher and admitted, in a quiet voice very different from his usual confident tone, that he had violated the trust placed in me by my family and stolen assets I was supposed to protect. Judge Fletcher accepted the plea agreement but added her own observation. Mr. Preston Foster, you exploited your family's trust for personal gain over multiple years. The only reason you're not going to prison today is because your victims, your own father and brother, have requested leniency, and because you've agreed to pay full restitution. But make no mistake, you committed serious crimes against the people who should have been able to trust you most. Preston was ordered to liquidate assets to begin restitution payments immediately. His Cherry Creek house went on the market within a week. The Mercedes was sold. Country club memberships were canceled. Bianca filed for divorce in August, citing irreconcilable differences and financial deception, taking their 2 children and whatever assets the court allowed her to protect. The Cayman Islands account was frozen through international legal cooperation, and those funds were eventually returned to the family trust. Within 3 months, Preston had gone from the family's golden child and financial expert to a convicted felon, living in a modest rental apartment, paying restitution from whatever consulting work he could find. The money came back in stages: $2.4 million from the house sale, $180,000 from the Mercedes, $890,000 from liquidating other personal assets, and eventually $1.8 million recovered from the Cayman account. The remaining balance was structured as a payment plan over 10 years, deducted from Preston's income before he saw a dollar. He'd be paying his family back until 2034. But the financial recovery, as important as it was, mattered less to me than the validation. Every family member who'd questioned my motives, dismissed my findings, or suggested I was being vindictive eventually apologized. Gerald publicly credited me with saving the family trust through professional diligence and personal courage. Owen told anyone who would listen that his wife was the smartest person he knows, and he should have trusted her from day one. Even Bianca, after the divorce, sent me a private message. "Thank you for having the strength to do what I couldn't, tell the truth about Preston when everyone wanted to believe his lies." I framed Preston's written apology email and kept it in my office, not out of vindictiveness, but as a reminder. Being dismissed doesn't mean being wrong, and silence in the face of theft makes you complicit in the crime. My professional reputation also benefited in unexpected ways. Word spread in Denver's financial community about the forensic accountant who caught her own brother-in-law stealing $9 million. And my firm started receiving more high-profile fraud investigation referrals. One detail brought particular satisfaction. After Preston's conviction became public record, several of his past business associates came forward with their own complaints. It turned out Preston had run similar schemes with non-family investors, taking their money for developments that never generated the promised returns, then using new investments to pay earlier investors, a classic Ponzi scheme. The Colorado Real Estate Commission opened an investigation and ultimately revoked Preston's broker license permanently. The Attorney General's office charged him with additional counts of securities fraud for the non-family victims. Preston pleaded guilty to those charges too, adding another 3 years to his probation and another $640,000 in restitution obligations. The man who dismissed me as someone who only understood bean counting was now permanently barred from the real estate industry, convicted of multiple felonies, divorced, and financially ruined. And it had all started because he made a critical mistake. He assumed the quiet accountant wouldn't know how to follow money, wouldn't have the skills to prove fraud, wouldn't have the courage to fight back against family pressure. He was wrong on all counts. The investigation taught me something valuable about financial crimes. They almost always leave trails because money has to go somewhere. Preston thought he'd hidden his theft behind complex structures and family trust. But money doesn't disappear. It just moves. And if you know how to track it, you can find where it went. Owen and I emerged from the ordeal with a stronger marriage, paradoxically, than before. The crisis had forced him to choose between enabling family dysfunction and supporting truth and accountability. He'd chosen truth, even when it was painful, and that choice meant something. We also implemented new protections for the family trust, with Victoria Cross serving as independent trustee and me providing quarterly forensic reviews to ensure transparency. Gerald remained involved, but no longer had unilateral control, and every investment required approval from both the trustee and an independent financial advisor. The trust had learned an expensive lesson about the difference between trusting family and verifying what they do with your money. By the fall of 2024, life had returned to something approaching normal. I still worked as a forensic accountant, but now with a deeper understanding of how financial abuse operates even in families, especially in families where questioning authority is seen as disloyalty. I started teaching a course at the University of Denver on family financial fraud, detection, and prevention, using sanitized versions of Preston's case as a teaching example. Students were always shocked to learn how common theft is within families, how victims often stay silent to preserve relationships, and how abusers exploit that silence. Preston's ecosystem collapsed completely and methodically over the months following his conviction. His business, built on reputation and relationships, evaporated when clients learned he'd stolen from his own family. Former associates who'd partnered with him on developments distanced themselves publicly. Social connections that had defined his identity, country club membership, charity board positions, invitations to exclusive events, all disappeared when criminal conviction made him a liability rather than an asset. He went from someone who commanded respect in Denver's real estate community to someone people crossed the street to avoid. Bianca's divorce was finalized in November, with her receiving primary custody of their children, and a significant portion of the marital assets the court ruled were legitimately hers rather than stolen from the trust. She moved to Colorado Springs to start fresh, later telling me she'd known something was wrong with Preston's finances for years, but didn't want to know the details. That willful ignorance had cost her a marriage, but at least she'd escaped before being implicated in his crimes. Preston's children, now teenagers, had limited contact with their father, who'd gone from providing them private school luxury to struggling to make court-ordered child support payments while managing massive restitution obligations. I didn't take pleasure in Preston's destruction, but I recognized it as necessary. Consequences aren't punishment, they're accountability. And accountability is what prevents the same behavior from repeating. The family dynamics shifted permanently in ways both painful and healthy. Gerald, who'd built the family wealth through legitimate business success, spent months processing that his son had become the kind of person he'd spent a career competing against. Someone who took shortcuts, exploited trust, and prioritized personal gain over integrity. He eventually told me, during a quiet conversation over coffee, "I realize now that I enabled Preston by always believing him, always giving him benefit of the doubt, always making excuses for problems. I taught him that being family meant escaping consequences. You taught all of us that being family should mean higher standards, not lower ones." Owen and I bought a modest house of our own, refusing Gerald's offer to gift us a down payment because we'd both learned the danger of financial obligations that come with unspoken strings. Our marriage was built on partnership and transparency now, with both of us reviewing our finances together monthly and making decisions jointly. We also established our own trust for future children, with independent management and clear documentation of every transaction. The experience had taught us that the best protection against financial abuse isn't trust alone, it's trust combined with verification, documentation, and willingness to question anything that doesn't make sense. I maintained my forensic accounting career, finding purpose in helping other victims of financial fraud find justice the way I'd found it. Each case reminded me that silence protects abusers while destroying victims, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their destructive behavior. Today, sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports for the family trust, reports now prepared by Victoria Cross and reviewed by me before distribution to all beneficiaries, I think about that February family meeting when Preston dismissed me as someone who only understood bean counting while he dealt in real money. He was right about one thing: there is a difference between the two. Real money is earned through honest work, invested transparently, and managed with accountability to everyone involved. The kind of money Preston dealt in was stolen, hidden behind lies, and built on the assumption that family loyalty meant accepting whatever story he told without verification. I learned that fighting back against family financial abuse doesn't make you vindictive or disloyal, it makes you honest. I learned that professional expertise matters, especially when someone tries to dismiss it to avoid scrutiny. I learned that the right choice is often the hard choice, and that protecting people sometimes means protecting them from themselves or from family members they trust too much. Most importantly, I learned that accountants don't just count beans. We follow money trails, uncover hidden theft, build prosecutable fraud cases, and sometimes save families from people who exploit the trust that should be sacred. Preston thought money made him untouchable, that wealth, confidence, and family position meant he could steal $8.9 million without consequences. He was wrong. Money didn't make him untouchable. It just made his crimes traceable, his lies disprovable, and his downfall inevitable. Because in the end, numbers don't lie, documents don't forget, and forensic accountants don't give up. I am Natalie Foster, I'm a bean counter, and I'm very, very good at what I do.